Hey everybody, we're back for Volume 2 of Straight Mail Reads. I really hope you enjoyed the first video if you had time to watch it. If you didn't, by all means, feel free to go find that one, check it out before you jump into this one. These videos are all going to be about books that I'm reading, whether fiction, nonfiction, kind of as a response to the article that came out recently that asked, why do straight white men not read? And the truth is we do. We read a lot, just not what's necessarily popular. So, first up this week, I do not have a physical copy of it, unfortunately. Sins of Empire by Brian McClellan. This is the second trilogy set in the same world as his Powder Mage trilogy. Includes a lot of the same characters. I've read the books previously, but after rereading the Powder Mage trilogy and a lot of the novellas and short stories, I wanted to jump into this trilogy again, kind of give it a second chance. Second read through, my feelings are pretty much still the same. It's good, it's entertaining, it's nowhere near as good as the first trilogy. I think he kind of went off on some tangents with some stuff in this, and he kind of got away from the core of what really made that first trilogy really good, which was a focus on the powder mages, in my opinion, and some of the secondary characters who were also really interesting as well. We do have one of those characters in here, Ben Steich. He's a cool character, basically a mountain of a man, an Arnold Schwarzenegger type guy who's actually tall and goes out there and just destroys his enemies. He's been in a prison camp for years at the time the book starts, and he's released with the kind of a mission to go out and be a spy for a character in the book who is revealed to be somebody else later on. But I'm not going to spoil that for anybody who hasn't read it. These are good books. By all means, read them, check them out. They're really good. They're really entertaining. Like I said, just not quite as good as the previous trilogy. But that's like saying, you know, The Empire Strikes Back is better than Return of the Jedi. We all know it is, but those of us who enjoy it still enjoy Return of the Jedi. But good book. Listen to this one on Audible this time because I've read it before. I'm a big fan of Audible. Most of the work I've done for most of my life has been physical labor, usually outdoors, that type of stuff, or I've spent a lot of time driving for work. So audiobooks are really handy for me. A lot of times if something's really good or if I really like the language, the way it's written, I'll actually go back and make sure I set time aside to actually read it as a physical copy. I'll read stuff on Kindle too. My favorite way of reading books is to actually read them with a physical copy, preferably a really nice hardcover. But that's not always possible. It's really easy to be able to pull up the Kindle app on my phone and be able to read a book right there on my phone, or to pop on an audiobook while I'm driving and listen to it that way. So a lot of stuff that I read will be Audible, will be Kindle version, stuff like that. If I don't have a physical copy of it, unfortunately I can't show it to you, but still, rest assured I have read it, and if I say I enjoyed it, I did. So moving on from Sins of Empire, I read the novella Murder at the Kinnen Hotel, a Powder Mage novella by Brian McClellan. Really, really good story that gives the kind of the backstory of one of the characters, Adamant, who is in the first trilogy. Um, Adamant and also Ben Steich from Sins of Empire have a little bit of magic. So in this world, and I haven't talked about this before, but it's a little cool aspect of this world. You have people who have what are called knacks. And a knack is a person who has some sort of magical ability, but it's usually something very small. In the case of Ben Steich, he can smell sorcery. So he can smell it when somebody is around who's using magic, or when something that's been touched by magic is nearby. Um, Adamant, the character from Murder at the Kinnen Hotel, who's a police officer in this story and a kind of a private investigator later on in the Powder Mage trilogy, Adamant's knack is that he doesn't forget. So he remembers everything he sees or hears. He has a perfect memory. There's another character in the series, Olim, whose knack is that he doesn't sleep. He doesn't need to sleep. He gets tired and he has to rest, but he doesn't actually sleep. So he can sit up playing cards all night and it's no big deal. and he becomes a bodyguard for obvious reasons to one of the characters in the original trilogy. Olam also is in the second trilogy as well. He's a cool character. I really like Olam, and one of the things that I dislike about the second trilogy is that I feel like he is underutilized as a character in the second trilogy, whereas his use in the first one was pretty good, and he was a really important character. Not to say he isn't important in the second one, but in the second trilogy, I just feel like he doesn't take as much of a forefront role as he should have, considering the way these stories evolve. Murder at the Kinnen Hotel is just that. It's a novella about Adamant investigating a murder, and he is having to deal with the fact that the murder victim is a noble. He's having to deal with the fact that the police aren't really interested in solving crimes so much correctly, so much as they are as just closing the case and hushing it up. There's a lot of corruption involved, things like that, and there's shenanigans that go on from there. But definitely a good story. Highly recommend it again. Check it out. Read this one on Kindle. Next one up is a work of nonfiction, Republican Party Reptile by P.J. O'Rourke. P.J. O'Rourke, sadly, is no longer with us, but he was a hell of a guy. I say that not as somebody who knew him, but somebody who's read a lot of his work and really enjoyed it. He is kind of a gonzo journalist. I mean, he is a gonzo journalist, but he's to the right for gonzo journalism. So that's again, Republican Party Reptile is where that title comes from. He was one of those guys who was he was a Republican, but he was also kind of out there. He drank, he used drugs, he did all that stuff. He went out, had good fun times. Can't say I agree with him on every single thing the man has ever said, and it would be really freaking boring if I did. But his takes on things are really interesting. He had a very good way of lampooning stuff. Actually worked for National Lampoon for a while. Also worked for Car and Driver. Did a lot of good journalism. So this is a collection of essays and articles that he wrote. You got to think of him as like Hunter S. Thompson, but with good advice for your IRA. Probably my favorite piece in this collection, and here is my copy here. I picked this up used on ABE Books. That's where I buy a lot of stuff just because I like to buy and read a lot of books, and that is a inexpensive way to do it. Favorite article in here is what's it called? Ship of Fools. And it is about his experiences on the Volga peace cruise in the USSR in the 80s, and just dealing with most of the people who went on this cruise from the US were very pro-Soviet people, very pro-communism, and the lengths they went to ignore the bad things that they saw, which of course the Soviets weren't going out of their way to show any of these things, but there was no effort whatsoever done to question, the lives of Soviet people. It kind of really does make a fool out of a lot of these people and show that they were just useful idiots. But he actually is very positive about the people he met who were actual Russians. It seemed like he enjoyed his time more with them, mainly because they were more honest, and they knew that this whole peace cruise was just Soviet propaganda and bullshit. So it was easy for them to kind of let down their guard with P.J. O'Rourke and have a few drinks and maybe let a few things slip. So really interesting essay. Don't like all of the essays in here. Some of them were just boring. Some of them are so dated that they don't really make sense to people. Some of it is him just screaming into the void, which I don't have an issue with, but it does get a little tiresome at times. But that's true of any pundit, any writer, whether it's a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer. There's always going to be a time where, even though you really enjoy their work, something they say or something they write is just going to make you go, man, that's just dumb or boring, or you might just disagree with it. That's fine. It's okay to enjoy stuff by people that you don't necessarily 100% agree with. It's probably a good thing if you do, because it shows that you can be fair and kind of balanced in your views. And it's like, okay, yeah, I really like PJ O'Rourke, but he had some opinions about certain things that I disagree with adamantly, other things that I agree with. Well, here's where he makes good points, here's where he makes bad points, and this is how we have a civilization, is by being able to do these things. We don't see a lot of that right now, unfortunately. Um, you've seen kind of this dichotomy on the political spectrum where everybody feels like they have to be at the other side's throats no matter what. And the best advice I have ever heard, that's been given by multiple people, is that you need to get out there and actually talk to people. Turn off Twitter, turn off the news, turn off YouTube. Yeah, even YouTube sometimes, even though I do like it. And go out there and actually talk to people. You'll find people that really agree with on some things or really enjoy some of the same things, but you may be diametrically opposed on other issues. And if you get to know them on grounds where you have a commonality, you can kind of try and see into their viewpoint on other issues a little more deeply. Um, yeah, not really where I intended to go with this video, but I thought that was a good discussion to have, especially when we're talking about somebody like PJ O'Rourke. Next book up I read. Listen to this one on Audible. I have a physical copy somewhere, but for the life of me, I can't find it. I've looked all over my library, um, everywhere that I usually keep my books, and I cannot find the thing. So it's really going to make me mad until I do. So I'm sorry I don't have that to show it to you because it's kind of a cool cover. But the book is Disquiet Gods, The Sun Eater, Book 6 by Christopher Ruocchio. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm pretty sure I am. So Ruocchio is kind of he is a master of what is termed science fantasy, and this is kind of how he has phrased it. He writes science fantasy, not science fiction. So what's the difference between science fiction and science fantasy? Um, Honestly, it's just a way of being a little more free with your writing, in my opinion. All science fiction is science fantasy because it's based on an extrapolation of our current technological levels and where we could be. Um, but some of the current theories and laws of sciences we have are violated in science fiction. Now, 1,000 years ago, the same would be said about our technology today. So I think it's interesting when people get, really bitchy about that. It's not really that big of an issue to me. But some other examples of science fantasy, probably the number one example of science fantasy is going to be Star Wars. Nothing in Star Wars really makes sense from our understanding of technology in the here and now. The way the ships work, the way they fly, lightsabers, all of that good stuff. Plus, it has magic involved, So there's a little bit of that. The Sun Eater series by Christopher Ruocchio is very much in that vein. There are heavy influences from both Star Wars and Dune, but they're done in a unique way, and it's really interesting to see it, especially in the first book. Highly recommend all of these. He is probably one of the best poetic writers out there, and when I say poetic writers, I mean his prose is just beautiful. It flows. It reads like poetry almost. It is very, very fun to read. Other writers who I would say the same about are like James Lee Burke from the crime fiction world, also a very beautiful, the prose he writes is just simply beautiful. It's amazing. Everybody should strive to want to be able to write that well. Not everybody can. You take Larry Correia, for example, who I'm sure I'll talk about at some point in this series, but Larry Correia calls his prose workman's prose. It's very to the point, blunt, but it's also very entertaining. So you can kind of get both. But if you want just like somebody who can beautifully put words on a page, Christopher Ruocchio is definitely one of those people. This is the sixth book in the series. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it just because it is the sixth book in the series, but the main character is somebody who has gone through a lot of trials, and he's basically trying to solve the universe, but the books are written as if he is sitting down and writing his memoirs. So you get little pieces sprinkled through. You get some breaking the third wall because of that. And it's good stuff. The whole series is in first person, which is kind of interesting for what is kind of I would say an epic of science fantasy. If you could just imagine, Lord of the Rings or something along that vein, written in first person. It's a totally different take on it, but it is done exceptionally well. All of the characters, even though they're filtered through one person's vision, really come alive and are believable. And I just really, really enjoy this series. Now, one thing I will say about it is very heavy, is the word I would use. There's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of emotion involved here, both ups and downs. There's a lot of dread involved. Um, so I have to pace myself with these books. I'll usually read a little bit, read something else, read a little more, read something else, just because there is so much that it can get kind of depressing. And none of the books, some of them do, but none of them really end so far on kind of a high note. And we kind of already know where the story's going, so it's not necessarily a happy ending. It will be a good ending. It will be a satisfying ending, but I don't think this is the type of story that's going to have a happy ending. Then again, Ruocchio could, surprise all of us and pull out a happy ending at the very end, kind of subvert expectations that way, and that would be a good way of subverting expectations. But we'll see. However he ends it, people will criticize it who have no business criticizing a guy who's a master of fiction. But everybody's open to criticism. Everybody is free to criticize, whether their criticism comes from a place of knowledge and understanding or not. But yes, really like these books. Christopher Ruocchio, Disquiet Gods, The Sun Eater, Book 6. Definitely recommend you pick up this series and start from book 1. Very heavy works, very long works. Definitely expect lengths to be more in line with your epic fantasy than with science fiction. Cool stuff. You should definitely read them, check them out. The guy definitely deserves your support if you are a science fiction or fantasy fan. And there are elements of both in this, so there's something for everybody to enjoy. Next book up is Star Wars X-Wing: The Bacta War by Michael A. Stackpole. So this is the 4th book in the X-Wing series. This was a fun little read. I don't necessarily think it's the best of the series, but it is a fun little read. Basically, you've got Rogue Squadron going out and going rogue, as it were. They've resigned their commissions and they're going out to try and take on one of their at this point, their number one nemesis, who has taken over a planet called Typhera, which is the only producer in the galaxy of Bacta, which, if you remember the Star Wars movies, Bacta is the stuff that's in the tank that Luke Skywalker is floating in Empire Strikes Back after he gets attacked by and hurt by the Wampa. Basically, it's very good at healing you, can regrow limbs, things like that. So they basically an Imperial has control of this planet. And they want to take it from her, but the New Republic is not down with going after her directly. So they basically just fuck off and decide to do it themselves. Also, a former member of Rogue Squadron was actually a spy, and I won't tell who it was, and they're after that person as well. So it's a good, entertaining story. Again, I'm reading these as kind of a build up to some of my favorite books in the Star Wars series. I think the next one up for me in my read will be The Courtship of Princess Leia, which I think is one of the best Star Wars books ever written. And then after that, I'll be jumping into the original Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn, which is probably the best Star Wars ever written. Really good stuff. So yeah, if you're into Star Wars, not necessarily, super happy with what you've seen Disney do, and you've never read the Star Wars Expanded Universe books, I highly recommend you go out and check them all out. Some are good, some are bad, some are not great. The first one to pick up is probably going to be the Truce at Baccarat, and it basically talks about the Rebel fleet still in Endor before they've left, when they're doing search and rescue. An Imperial ship message comes in where somebody has invaded a planet or a system called Bakura, with the planet Bakura. They don't know who they are. The Imperials have never seen them before, and they're basically begging the Empire for help. And they sent the message to Endor because that's where the High Command, the Emperor, Vader, everybody was. And the rebellion, which is at this point starting to form into the New Republic, decides to send a fleet to try and relieve this planet and hopefully bring them on board in joining the New Republic. So it's really not my favorite of the Star Wars books, but it's a pretty good start into that world. If you're not into that one, I definitely, if you want more action type stuff, definitely jump into the X-Wing series. And if you just have no idea where to begin, the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn is always a good place to start. Um, it will give you the Han Solo, Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker that you wanted when you first heard of the Disney sequel trilogy. Um, that's all I really have to say about that. That's all I have to say today. I hope everybody enjoyed what I had to say today. Um, Again, like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Share with your friends if they're into books. I will continue doing this as long as it's fun to do it, and hopefully it will be fun for a long time.